North Korea fields about 570 combat aircraft, 200 helicopters, and 110,000 personnel. On paper, that is a large air force. The numbers demand attention. Then the flight lines come into view. MiG-15, MiG-17, and MiG-19 fighters stand in rows. These aircraft first flew in the late 1940s and early 1950s. The force still resembles its Cold War-era lineup. Its size remains significant. Its core fighters belong to the first post-war generations. Those first post-war fighters reflected a shortage that began before North Korea had an air arm of its own. In 1945, Japan's defeat ended the Second World War, and the Korean Peninsula was divided. North Korea had almost no aviation infrastructure. The Soviet Union created the Korean Aviation Society that year, first as a flying club modeled on Soviet equivalents. In 1946, it became a military organization. By November 1948, aviation became an independent branch of the Korean People's Army. Experienced Korean aviators posed a political problem. Before this, the Koreans with real flying experience had served in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. The new communist state treated them as politically untouchable. That left the new force with little prior Korean flying experience it could use. In May 1950, a Soviet report counted 120 trained pilots. Only 2 held combat qualifications. Those scarce combat-qualified pilots were needed on June 25, 1950, when North Korea invaded the South. The Air Force flew what it had: Yak-9 propeller fighters and El-10 ground attack aircraft, largely Soviet aircraft left from the Second World War. Their engines still droned over the front. American jets were already faster. During the opening weeks, Yak-9s supported ground forces, while El-10s struck South Korean airfields. The fleet was small, with too few crews ready for combat. United States Navy and Air Force jets began taking aircraft from the sky. By August, Soviet forces reported that North Korean air units had almost stopped combat operations. Less than 2 months had done it. Soviet help rebuilt the force and changed its aircraft. Soviet pilots flew MiG-15s under Chinese and Korean markings, while North Korean crews began moving into the same jet. The MiG-15 was followed by the MiG-17, then the MiG-19. From 1963, the MiG-21 began arriving in North Korean service. China widened the buildup. Hundreds of aircraft reached North Korean airfields through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Some were Chinese-built copies of Soviet designs. The rows kept growing. By the early 1980s, the Korean People's Army Air Force ranked among Asia's largest by numbers. That inventory later sent North Korean pilots into 2 conflicts beyond the peninsula. Neither mission took place over Korea. In Vietnam, the cost appeared early. Wang Hong Sang was 19 when he was shot down in September 1965. That year, Kim Il-sung sent North Korean pilots to fly beside the North Vietnamese Air Force. Jet engines rose before each MiG-17 and MiG-21 sortie. The mission stayed secret for decades. The pilots wore North Vietnamese uniforms and accepted North Vietnamese command. Vietnamese files called them Friends Z. Between 87 and 96 North Korean pilots served during the deployment. Vietnamese records credited them with 26 American aircraft shot down between 1967 and 1968. That total remains disputed. 14 North Korean pilots died during the deployment. The Vietnam deployment did not close North Korea's overseas combat record. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, a small detachment flew MiG-21 fighters from Bir Arida in southern Egypt. Their combat role remained limited. Across the war, they met Israeli aircraft only 4 to 6 times. On December 6th, an Israeli F-4 formation intercepted a MiG-21 flown by a North Korean pilot. It became the last air engagement on the Egyptian front. The North Korean pilot tried to force the Israeli jets into a slow-turning fight. 2 Israeli missiles struck the MiG. The aircraft emerged from both fireballs, apparently intact, then turned west with smoke behind it. Egyptian fire shot it down moments later. Israeli pilots learned only decades afterward that their opponent had been North Korean. After 1973, North Korean Air Force pilots did not fly another known combat mission. Soviet deliveries continued to build North Korea's air arm through the late 1970s and 1980s. The MiG-23 arrived early in the decade. In 1987, Pyongyang received 2 major types, the Su-25 and MiG-29. The Su-25 attacked ground targets. The MiG-29 strengthened interception. North Korea became one of the first foreign recipients of the MiG-29, the Soviet Union's leading frontline fighter of its era. By the late 1980s, its fleet had MiG-29s for interception and Su-25s for strike sorties. Those newer aircraft remained on the ramps, but the support behind them disappeared after the Soviet Union collapsed. Deliveries of aircraft ended, spare parts stopped arriving, and technical advisors no longer came to keep crews and airframes ready. At the same time, North Korea's economy declined into the mid-1990s famine, which killed between 500,000 and 3 million people. The military received priority access to resources, yet fuel shortages never fully ended and still restricted Air Force flying. Sanctions that followed North Korea's nuclear weapons development deepened its isolation, while foreign suppliers and large-scale black market purchases remained beyond Pyongyang's reach. Modernization stalled there. With rare exceptions, the aircraft North Korea possessed in 1991 remain in its fleet today. That long freeze shapes the count seen today. Estimates of North Korea's Air Force differ because the country keeps its inventory closed. Yet the broad picture holds: about 570 combat aircraft, mostly Soviet or Chinese designs, built between the 1950s and 1980s. MiG-15 and MiG-17 fighters remain on the inventory. Both date to the Korean War era. Their regular flying status is doubtful. They were never formally retired. The MiG-19 and its Chinese counterpart, the J-6, account for about 100 airframes. MiG-21 fighters and Chinese J-7 aircraft add another large group. Those designs came from the 1960s. Many other air forces retired them decades ago. Together, MiG-21s and J-7s make up more than 100 aircraft in the fleet. Beyond the older fighters, roughly 56 MiG-23s bring a later generation into the fleet. Their wings change sweep in flight. They remain interceptor aircraft. 34 Su-25s follow them on the runway, built to strike ground targets under combat conditions. The type has flown in several conflicts. That record matters. It makes the Su-25 the fleet's clearest conventional strike aircraft, though the number ready for flight remains unclear. For a pilot defending Pyongyang, the MiG-29 stands at the top of this force. About 35 are believed to remain in service. They are North Korea's most capable fighters. Yet no public count shows how many can fly at a given moment, receive maintenance, or carry out a combat mission. The MiG-29s remain the aircraft assigned to defend Pyongyang during an air battle. Beyond the fighters assigned to Pyongyang, another risk waits near the coast and the border. North Korea keeps about 80 Harbin H-5 bombers, Chinese copies of the Soviet Il-28 design from 1948. Their jet profiles are slow and visible. Modern air defenses can engage them. Yet the H-5 carries heavy bomb loads, and some aircraft carry Kumsong-3 anti-ship cruise missiles. That gives these bombers a coastal strike role when airspace is contested. The An-2 creates another problem. The single-engine biplane first flew in 1947, but North Korea still operates about 300. At night, it can follow terrain at low altitude, staying below radar coverage in certain conditions. Its mission includes moving Special Operations Forces into South Korea during a conventional war. The sound arrives first. Propellers from the northern side of the border. That split defines the threat. The H-5 brings bombs and anti-ship missiles, but faces modern defenses on approach. The An-2 brings people, using darkness, low altitude, and the ground to conceal its route. Low night flight lets the An-2 use terrain and remain below radar detection. Beyond the low flight profile, another fleet shows how North Korea fills gaps when formal channels close. 48 Polish-built Mi-2 utility helicopters stand beside 41 Mi-8 transports. 20 Mi-24 attack helicopters add firepower. 4 Mi-26 aircraft carry heavy loads. 8 naval Mi-14 helicopters hunt submarines and conduct search and rescue missions. Then come 3 P-750 light transports built in New Zealand. In 2017, Pacific Aerospace was found guilty of illegally exporting them through a Chinese company. The company paid a fine. The aircraft stayed in North Korea. Those 3 P-750 transports were not the only unusual aircraft to enter the fleet. Another clue is a single IL-76 with a large radar fairing over its fuselage. North Korea has developed unmanned aircraft for years, even with little access to foreign equipment. Saebyul-4 is a North Korean reconnaissance drone. Analysts assess it as a copy of the American RQ-4 Global Hawk. Saebyul-9 resembles the MQ-9 Reaper. The outward resemblance proves little. Its range, sensors, and endurance remain unknown. But both projects point toward surveillance beyond the immediate battlefield. North Korea also converted at least one heavy IL-76 transport into an airborne early warning aircraft. It carries a domestically developed AESA radar beneath that large fairing. Only one such aircraft appears in the Korean People's Army Air Force. Its role is long-range detection and air surveillance. The real test remains hidden. No evidence confirms that the sole converted IL-76 performs as intended. That uncertainty stayed in the air. In November 2023, Malagyeong-1 rose from a night launch site and reached orbit. North Korea identifies it as a reconnaissance satellite. The KPAF now lists it in its inventory. Its stated role is surveillance from orbit. The contrast remains below. Regular MiG-21 training depends on fuel supplies. Malagyeong-1 entering orbit and joined the KPAF inventory. Fuel determines which squadrons can leave the runway. A rare weapon fit changes nothing when pilots cannot train regularly. NATO fighter pilots usually log about 150 to 180 hours each year. United States and South Korean pilots fly comparable totals. That schedule keeps combat skills current. North Korean assessments place annual flight time between 15 and 25 hours. Some estimates fall to 7. The gap is stark. Aviation fuel has remained scarce since the famine of the 1990s. The available supply goes first to MiG-29 and MiG-23 units assigned to defend Pyongyang. Older aircraft sit lower on the allocation list. Their pilots may barely fly at all. 15 to 25 hours can preserve basic control of a fast jet, but not the repeated tactical practice combat demands. The shortage shapes every large sortie. In 2022, North Korea prepared 150 aircraft for a rare major air exercise. Jet engines ran more often. Fuel reserves fell. Sources inside the country told Radio Free Asia that crews needed a full month of intensive training before the event. 1 month of preparation preceded an exercise involving 150 aircraft. That preparation begins much earlier. A cadet enters the cockpit only after officials judge his family politically reliable. The fear is concrete. North Korean pilots have flown their aircraft to South Korea in past decades. Training runs for 4 years at 2 main schools, the Kim Chek Air Force Academy in Cheongjin and the Kyongsong Flight Officers School. An engine starts briefly before a rare training sortie. Fuel shortages restrict flying. Aging aircraft restrict it further. Graduates reach frontline units slowly. They take seats in aircraft they have not had enough flight time to master. That limited flight time meets another barrier on the apron. An aircraft without maintenance does not fly. A trained pilot cannot launch a MiG-29 or Su-25 without an engine, avionics, and spare parts. North Korea can build light single-engine aircraft, including possible trainers and utility planes. It cannot make jet engines or modern avionics. It also lacks the complex components those combat aircraft require. Sanctions made outside supplies harder to obtain, though Russian access has eased that pressure in recent years. The repair sequence is simple and costly. One required part is missing. Technicians remove a panel with metal tools from an aircraft left on the ground, then fit that part to another airframe. The first aircraft remains parked so the second can fly. North Korean crews have used this practice for decades. Across North Korean airfields, aircraft sit for long periods on concrete aprons. Their outlines do not move. Satellite images show no visible maintenance around many of them. Pyongyang claims about 570 combat aircraft. That number is paper strength. Only a fraction may be ready for a combat sortie on a given day because parked aircraft still need parts, technicians, and regular servicing. U.S. Defense Intelligence judges that North Korea's Air Force cannot defeat the United States or its allies. South Korea fields F-35 fighters, upgraded F-15K and F-16 jets, and the new KF-21. The gap reaches beyond aircraft numbers. South Korea holds the advantage in pilot training, technology, and aviation maintenance. The imbalance in the air led to a concrete bargain. Late in 2024, North Korea sent about 12,000 troops to Russia to support Moscow's war against Ukraine. Admiral Samuel Paparo said Russia agreed to provide MiG-29 and Su-27 fighters. The Su-27 would be unfamiliar territory. North Korea has never operated that aircraft. It is a fourth-generation fighter, built for long-range missions and hard maneuvering. Even older versions would give its pilots a type beyond the current North Korean fleet. But an aircraft delivery is only one step. Reports indicate North Korean pilots have gone to Russia for possible training on these fighters. That would mark their first overseas training on foreign equipment since the Cold War. Jet engines wait on the flight line. The pilots head to Russia. That training route is only the first step. A new fighter must arrive, be learned by its crews, and be maintained after every flight. The number of aircraft remains unclear. Delivery dates do as well. Russia's aerospace industry is already supplying its own air force during an active war, leaving any transfer to North Korea dependent on a pressured production base. The arrangement still marks the first serious attempt to renew the Korean People's Air Force in more than 3 decades. Soviet-era Su-27s and extra MiG-29s cannot change the force in a short time. Better aircraft do not solve limited pilot training. They do not solve maintenance either. Ground crews need parts, inspections, and experience before they can return each jet to service after a sortie. Meanwhile, South Korea continues to field modern aircraft and receive more. A few dozen additional fourth-generation fighters do not close the gap between the two air forces. Even new Russian fighters remain in the hands of pilots who fly only about 15 to 25 hours each year. That limits what any delivery can change. Training takes time. Maintenance takes more. The force still operates MiG-15 and MiG-17 aircraft from the Korean War era. Its IL-28 bomber was designed in 1948. The newest aircraft acquired by North Korea entered service in the late 1980s. Age is only one limit. Pilots fly too little to build routine. Ground crews face restricted maintenance capacity after every sortie. Replacement aircraft require foreign help. A brief engine burst can still send an old fighter down the runway. Keeping it ready is another task. Those limits leave North Korea's Air Force outside its main military threat. That threat rests on its nuclear arsenal and ballistic missiles. Western analysts treat the Air Force as a secondary part of that danger. Its pilots fly about 15 to 25 hours a year.